And CTS will be held accountable.
School teacher Tate McQueen and chemist Barry Duran
when I first got involved in this was actually back in March 13th, 2007.
Have spent years researching the contamination at the CTS site and how the EPA has handled it.
My first objective was to make sure my family's safe, so I didn't feel like I had a choice. I had to get involved.
Go.
McQueen says EPA officials have refused to give him certain documents related to the site. In June, News 13 sent the EPA a Freedom of Information request for any and all EPA documents related to the CTS site. A few weeks later, they sent us the information. These 3 CDs contain nearly 63,000 pages of documents. That's a lot of information. And this is what 63,000 pages looks like.
While we've been asking for all these documents, you asked for it, and within 10 days you've got 62,000 pages, 62,922 pages.
Duran and McQueen helped us to locate certain reports. Some were scattered in between documents, some buried beneath layers of folders and files. Many we found have never been released to the public.
We found the tip of the iceberg. Okay, that's what we've been working with. They delivered to you the iceberg. Now all you have to do is melt it. All you have to do is go through and read it.
We found the original study plan from NUS's 1990 testing. It included a map and plans detailing each area NUS had originally planned to sample for the EPA in order to gauge whether the contamination was spreading. According to this map, NUS and EPA officials never intended to do any testing on the Rice property back in 1990.
That map changes the way we look at the site, literally.
Part of the newly released documents may explain why the EPA switched locations. In 1990, just 2 months before testing began, the state sent the EPA this complaint made by Dave Ogren.
And I looked down the hill and I thought, oh, there's the problem.
Reporting his suspicion that the CTS site was contaminating the Rice's drinking water. Then, 1 week before testing, the state sent that complaint directly to NUS, and once again, they also sent a copy to the EPA.
We believe that they changed the sampling locations in a week's time because they had been notified by the state.
Records show NUS moved one of their sample locations from the middle of the CTS site to the Rice's springs, all without asking for the Rice's permission or publicly reporting the test results.
I mean, it was just unbelievable that it could happen to us.
Residents wonder if they'd be healthier today if the EPA had simply warned them about the contamination back in 1990.
That could have saved us from drinking this water an additional 9 years. It could have saved my grandchildren from being even affected by it at all.
Throughout the years, the EPA has spent millions of tax dollars testing at the CTS site.
$8,573,115.97.
Meanwhile, officials won't disclose how much CTS has spent. We asked Foster why the EPA hasn't removed the contaminated soil at the site.
We feel like the contamination has migrated down to the groundwater level, so just excavating soil at this point isn't necessarily the best solution.
And at this point, the EPA has no solution for treating the contaminated groundwater. In 2006, CTS did use a soil vapor extraction system, or SVE, to remove 6,000 pounds of chemicals, including TCE, from the soil. But state officials questioned how successful it was, and in 2010, it was canceled. For years, residents and lawmakers have demanded an immediate removal of the soil at the CTS site. They want to know why the EPA won't do that if it would eliminate the toxins in the ground.
Well, soil remediation itself, that's what the soil vapor extraction system was meant to do. It's one of many different treatment technologies versus excavating.
To this day, neither the EPA nor CTS has removed the contaminated soil from the site. We wanted to know why, but after reaching out to CTS officials and their attorneys numerous times, we got no response.
To me, it's in CTS's best interest to just clean up the site. Forget about EPA for a moment. I don't know why CTS doesn't clean up the site.
Even though EPA officials have said CTS is a potentially responsible party, residents assume the EPA didn't have enough evidence to force the company to clean things up. Or did they? CTS has always denied doing anything wrong. In 2002, CTS's attorney responded to the EPA's concerns, stating CTS has no knowledge of any such spill, leak, release, or discharge of hazardous substances. And CTS further stated the plant was maintained in good condition. But we uncovered documents that seem to contradict that. In 1987, CTS was in the process of selling 45 acres of the land to the developer Mills Gap Road Associates. Mills Gap wanted to gauge the extent of contamination, so CTS hired the company Law Environmental to conduct the testing. When that testing was complete, a report was issued to CTS. Inspectors had found elevated levels of toxic chemicals, including TCE, in the soil under the plating room. They reported the suspected source of the volatile constituent contamination is from spills or leaks. In the plating room, inspectors also noted there's an area where acid spilled from the tank and emptied into the drainage spillway. The concrete has been dissolved in this area, exposing the underlying soil. The company recommended further testing to determine if groundwater contamination was a risk. We uncovered another document that makes similar claims. In 2003, this letter was sent to the EPA from a company called TRW, which sold the building to CTS in 1959. TRW says when they operated the plant, they used acid brick on the floor trenches to keep chemicals from eroding into the ground. TRW claims it is reasonable to conclude that the sections of trench that were installed using cement, not acid brick, were part of later modifications by CTS, and the concrete trenches eroded, exposing bare soil, allowing liquids to discharge directly to the soil and into the underlying groundwater.
That is super important because CTS has had a history of claiming that the site was clean.
We wanted to know what CTS and the EPA had to say about these documents, but they refused to comment.
When we come back, we do our own testing to see if the air and water is still contaminated today. What we found has already caught the EPA's attention when Buried Secrets returns.
Welcome back to this News 13 special report, Buried Secrets. EPA officials are being investigated for possible criminal actions for the way they handled the CTS site.
Investigative reporter Mike Mason tracked down top EPA officials who finally admitted something resident Dot Rice has been waiting to hear for more than 23 years.
How you doing, Mike?
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Franklin Hill is EPA's Region 4 Director of Superfund sites. On August 21st, Hill and other top EPA officials drove from their headquarters in Atlanta to Congressman Mark Meadows' office in Hendersonville. They wanted to meet with Dot Rice to talk about further testing on her property. She saw this as a chance to finally get some answers.
We kept, trying to find out why, that EPA had known the water was contaminated and didn't tell us. And they had no answer for us.
Dot brought along an MP3 player to record the conversation. Dot told officials she would consider their proposals, but only if they would first admit to the testing done at her springs back in 1990.
I think that somebody needs to say, I'm sorry. We came on your property in 1990, made tests. Mr. Hill, I know you know that they came on our property in 1990, made the test, and it was 1,100 parts per DCE, and no one told me. Why?
As far as an apology, I have no problem apologizing for that fact that we did not notify you of what we found in the spring.
Hey, Mike Mason, WLOS.
How you doing, Mike?
How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Can I ask When the meeting was over, we had our own questions for Franklin Hill.
First of all, I heard that you admitted that you tested on the Rice property back in 1990.
I think the file does indicate that there was a sample that was taken on the Rice's property.
And it was contaminated.
Yes.
We then asked why the Rices were never told about it.
I think what happened there is, at least based on the information that's been provided to me, is that we had a field contractor in the field who was in the field taking samples, unaware of where he was, and took a sample in the stream. I don't think there was any negligence on his part.
But nobody told them about the testing, and nobody told them about the testing in 1990.
We're gonna have to go. I'm sorry.
You can't answer that question? I mean, isn't that negligent? That's a toxic chemical, sir.
Mike, what I'll say to you is that there's been no negligence on anybody's part here in Buncombe County. Have a good day.
We never got a chance to ask Hill other questions we had, like why were pages missing from the EPA's version of the 1990 inspection report? The state's copy clearly referenced a set of field logbook notes. Field inspectors take these notes to detail their testing hour by hour, and those notes could possibly explain why NUS moved the test to the Rice property.
We believe may have evidence that shows that they made a conscious decision to go onto the Rice property.
For years, residents and lawmakers have requested the logbooks, but the EPA claims they're missing. When News 13 requested the logbooks in August, the EPA sent us this letter stating those records did exist at one time, but both NUS and the EPA's copies must have been misfiled or no longer exist. The EPA did, however, produce the field logbook notes from testing they did in 1999. The EPA hired NUS again. By this time, the company had changed its name to Tetra Tech, and the EPA was now referring to CTS as the Mills Gap site. The EPA's contractor maps from 1990 and 99 both show the spot where inspectors tested on the Rice's property, and both maps indicate there's a pipe or culvert leading from the CTS site to the area next to the Rice's springs. In the 1990 field logbook, inspectors referred to this pipe as a drainage system for CTS.
That was stated on their worksheet, that that's where it was, that drained onto our property.
In that logbook, inspectors wrote, they collected the Rice's sediment sample at the drainage pipe outfall, which drains the Mills Gap site property, and the flow continues onto the Rice residents' property as an unnamed stream. There is an oily sheen on the surface water with a slight odor. When NUS found DCE in the Rice's stream back in 1990, they reported it may be attributed to waste handling practices at CTS. One of the most important documents in all of this may be this emergency action memorandum from 2002. That's when EPA officials determined the contamination at CTS posed a threat to public health, requiring immediate action. And this memo authorized the government to pay for the cleanup.
They could do it right now. I mean, they could go in right now and do that.
The memo states the situation at the site will worsen if a removal action is delayed or not taken. The presence of contaminated soil beneath the building at the site poses a threat to the nearby population and environment. Unless removal actions are initiated and completed, the contaminants will continue to be a source of groundwater and surface water contamination. The EPA called for 6 months of testing, and then the soil at CTS would be treated or removed. That was 11 years ago.
They promised they would clean it up, and they haven't.
I would like to see a complete cleanup.
The EPA knew if they failed to take immediate action, there would be consequences. Their memo states, based on the extremely high levels of TCE in the Rice's spring, it is not unreasonable to expect the TCE levels in the well water to increase over time. And they did. In 2007, Rice paid a private company to test their springs, and they found TCE had risen to 293,000 parts per billion. That's over 97,000 times the state limit. And still, no cleanup.
I was really curious as to why it wasn't being done, and all this time had gone by.
It was right down in there.
But EPA officials tell us they did comply with the action memo by installing that fence around the Rice's spring in 2007.
The springs that are most contaminated were fenced off to prevent human exposure. So any immediate threats of exposure have been addressed under the removal program.
Explanations like these only angered residents more. They had grown tired of waiting and demanded action.
What we're looking for is a complete cleanup.
In October of 2007, EPA officials came to Asheville and began holding public meetings to talk with residents about the CTS site. They thought it would help diffuse the tension. But now, 30 meetings later, many residents are more upset and less trusting of the EPA.
And it's hard to find any faith at all that anything will ever be done.
In 2012, the administrative record for CTS finally reappeared at the Pack Library. 5 years after it went missing, the EPA replaced the binder with CDs, but once again, McQueen noticed a problem with one of the reports.
And it was incomplete. It was missing over 160 pages.